Hey everybody, hope you're all doing well. My name is Steven and this is the Storytime channel. We've got some great malicious compliance stories, so let's jump into our first story of the day by Spiked Bike, Railroad Chop Shop. Prologue. So I used to work for a company that dealt with refurbishing locomotives and rail cars. It was an unbelievably greasy operation. To start with, they hired only apprentice welders because the government gave out grants for that sort of thing. Secondly, if you thought the job was too unsafe, go home because there were hundreds waiting for your job. Highest unemployment rate in the country. Thirdly, the company was basically buy, beg, or steal to make the bare minimum requirements for job A, while job B through G would get progressively more difficult to complete. They'd do anything from put on fake parts just to get a milestone payment to outright stealing parts from the neighboring railroad. Right around here is when I got my promotion to lead hand of the demolition crew. My job wasn't only to disassemble entire train cars and organize the parts, it was also designed to make people quit. I'd get the dumbest of dumb put onto my crew and I'd be told to treat them like absolute crap, make them do the worst jobs because they couldn't fire them, or else they'd lose the government grants. I'm not a bad guy. A little rough around the edges, but here comes malicious compliance. I'd straight up tell the guys who were targeted to go buy a voice recorder and tell them that the next day I was going to tear into them and I wanted them to record it so they could use it as evidence against the company, so they could either collect wrongful dismissal claims or unemployment. After about 2 weeks, the majority of them would indeed quit and thank me afterwards for the heads up. I'd say I made 15 guys quit before the company was black flagged and taken over. Okay, be honest guys, would you have the heart to tear into these people? If yes, if no, why? Let me know in the comments down below. Our next story is by generic username 9067, Don't threaten me with taking your business elsewhere. I used to work in a branch of Barclays on a high street in an affluent university town. Customer comes in and starts giving me crap for something. It was about 4 to 5 years ago, so I can't recall, but I think it was something like he had bad service in a different branch or call center. So he goes in at me saying how bad Barclays is. Agreed. And how much better other banks are, and that he doesn't really use his account with us and that he would close his account with us if we didn't sort something out by way of a threat. I asked him to confirm he wanted to close his account, and his pride wouldn't let him back down from his original threat while he was in front of other people. He confirms, then carries on his tirade. I immediately close his bank account with Barclays and transfer him the money that was in it and ask him if there is anything else I can do for him. He then starts complaining about me closing his account, and I tell him, as he isn't a customer with Barclays, unless he wants anything else, could he please leave? The situation was very tense and he was very loud and shouty. I thought he could do with being taken down a peg, so I took away the tool he was using to threaten me with. I probably sound like a tick, but freak that guy and retail jobs. It absolutely was not your fault that they had bad experiences with the company. Yes, you work for the company, you're kind of attached to it, but that's no reason to give all the grief and the blame on some retail worker. People like OP are unfairly taking the brunt of the situation, while all the people at the tippy top are counting their money and not getting any of the actual grief. It's just an unfortunate situation that people like OP in those positions for these companies have to face. The next story was written by Cameron Conway. Don't do any work? Okay. For context, this is my dad's story. He used to work for a small plumbing company that would install the large coffee machines in coffee shops. So my dad always showed up to his job about 30 minutes early because he had to take the bus to work. It was no big deal to him, just a part of his commute. Part of how his job worked was it was an 8-hour workday, but if you finished the last job before the end of your shift, you could go home for the day. My dad, a good worker, would only take a fraction of his 30-minute lunch to work, then work for the rest of it. He did this for a while until his boss called him for a meeting. The boss proceeds to give him crap for not taking the mandatory 30-minute lunch, blah blah blah. My dad tries to argue the fact that it's not putting him out, but the boss insists. Take the full 30 minutes. Cue malicious compliance. The next day, he shows up to work as usual, and the minute his lunch break starts, he stops working and goes on break. Over the 30 minutes, he gets a few calls from his boss, doesn't answer. By this point, he's finished eating and is just sitting, waiting for his lunch to be over. His coworker comes in and asks if he's been getting the boss's calls. My dad explains the situation, and his coworker smiles and walks out. Later that night, getting back to the shop, the boss confronts my dad and starts to lose it. My dad calmly interrupts him and just says, "Sorry, I can't work during my 30-minute lunch break." Needless to say, there weren't any more issues with my dad working during his lunch break after that. It definitely seems a bit flip-floppity to say, well, you need to take your 30-minute mandatory lunch break and you need to make sure you're spending that entire 30 minutes, and then instantly right away call them up and be like, where were you for those 30 minutes specifically? The next story is by Dekoff. We like you where you are. My very first job I got was a cart pusher at Walmart. I was 16 years old. I wanted to be a cashier so that I wasn't outside so much. After maybe 5 months working there, I noticed they are hiring for cashier position. I went to HR/staffing and asked them if I could be enrolled in the training. They told me no and said something along the lines of, "We are happy with having you where you are at." I was a bit of a chaotic little shoot at that age and the gears started turning. "But you are hiring new people to be cashiers, right?" HR says yes. "So, if I was not employed here and I applied, then I would be considered for the cashier position, is that right?" HR says, "Well, yes, that is true." "Okay, well then let's do that. I would like to be a cashier, so I would like to resign." HR, clearly baffled, "You would need to provide a letter in writing that you were going to resign." I wrote a letter of resignation on a post-it and handed it to HR. This was all at the beginning of my shift, mind you. Near the end of my shift, I was asked to speak to HR. They were informing me that I had been enrolled in the cashier education classes. A week later, I was working indoors and had a $1 per hour raise. I love that OP realized that this job was really just a stepping stool to get higher and higher in the workforce and wasn't afraid to leverage their security with the job to push for something they truly wanted, which was the cashier position. And it worked out for them. It was a great move. Our next story is by Friendly Mom. Okay, you can sing now. Just a cute little memory that popped up. I have this daughter who loves singing and dancing and is one of those social butterfly types. Hubby and I are such introverts, we don't know how this happened. Anyway, one evening, she was about 5 and we were singing along her then favorite song whilst I was cleaning the kitchen after dinner. Hubby tells her to go brush her teeth as he was wrangling the kids towards bed, and little miss says to me, "Don't sing anymore until I get back," because she doesn't want to miss anything. "Really?" I ask. "Okay, you can sing now." She runs to the bathroom. So I begin in my most beautifulest singing voice and a lovely tune I sing. No, no, no. No, 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 no. I sung now for a good 5 minutes, fully committed to singing it as best I could. Hubby catches on and tries to add a harmony whilst he's chasing up the other kids. Miss 5 gets back all stroppy. "That's not what I meant. I meant you could sing later." "Oh, okay. Sorry, honey. Later, later, later." Boy, she got cross at us for our malicious compliance. She was able to laugh at our little joke the next day, and now it's a running family thing. First, I apologize for any attempted singing there. Secondly, this is a really cute family moment, and I'm glad it's something they shared with us because I know it's going to be something that they're going to be thinking about for a long time as a very fun thing to look back on. The next story is by Thicky Thick Glasses. Boss doesn't have time to discuss tips I'm not supposed to take. Okay, time to make real money. I used to work as a stockman for a very big chain store. It would probably take you one guess to guess which one. I was 17 years old, fit, into sports, and was not lazy. My stockman coworkers were lazy, slow, and had no motivation. If I saw a box said, 2-person lift, I just put it on my shoulder and left with the customer to the front checkout. My coworkers would go find someone, and even then they had a hard time lifting anything overhead. Customers were always so happy to have me help them, and I got frequent tips. I wasn't supposed to take tips, and I would tell them that. Some people insisted and would get angry if I didn't take it. The first time it happened, I reported it because my training said I was supposed to give it to the store. The manager on duty said, "I don't care what you do, I don't have time for this right now." In my 17-year-old mind, I said, okay. The town I worked in was where rich people went to go on vacation and had homes they rented out for like $2,000 a week. They had no problem giving me $20 or more. I made so much money just being a decent, helpful human being that didn't waste people's time that I ended up getting my own down payment for my own car. Nice. Hey, it doesn't hurt the store any. The store still made as much money as they were ever going to, considering they didn't ever plan to take anything from tips. So you made some extra money in an affluent area, the store got as much business as usual and, even got positive feedback, I'm sure. So it seemed like a win-win to me. Our next story is by Angel Lights, Me versus My 5th grade teacher, The Great Book Boogaloo. So some of y'all Zoomers may be familiar with AR points. For those who aren't, AR stands for Accelerated Reader, which was a program that assigned a reading level and points to each book based on the difficulty of reading it and the length. Where I grew up, we were expected to read as many books as possible and then take short online tests for them. If you passed, then you got however many points the book was worth was added to your AR score. Now this was a big freaking deal. We had an uncountable number of dances and parties and prizes that you could only gain access to if you had a certain amount of points. You could buy candy and toys with your points, and we had an entire mini economy based on reading books and taking tests. Child me loved reading, and being an awkward horse girl, I usually had nothing better to do all day than read. I legit would take books with me to lunch and recess and just read. So naturally, I dominated the AR rankings. I was always the student who ended the year with the most points, and my teachers just loved getting to say the best reader in the school was in their class. This was all fine and dandy until I entered Mrs. K's class in 5th grade. Mrs. K had a policy where before taking an AR test, you had to write a short summary of the book. This was to prevent students from trying to get points by taking tests for books they hadn't read and failing them. However, I was a reader, not a writer, and I resented this heavily. Mrs. K almost always had the #1 student and she wanted to win again. But 10-year-old me refused to write the summaries. I had spent years not having to, so why should I start doing more work for the same thing? So I stopped taking tests. I kept reading, but refusing to write a summary and take the test. I gave up the parties and the prizes just because 5th grade me refused to write a 1-paragraph summary of a book. Mrs. K tried to convince me to take the tests and that she'd only make me write a few sentences, but I had made my choice. I had traded getting to do the cha-cha slide for keeping my moral high ground. She tried talking to my mom and my other teachers, but no one could convince me to do so. She resented that she was not going to have the student with the most points, but was unwilling to give up her precious summaries. She said she couldn't make a special exception for me because all the other students were still happily writing summaries and taking tests. Now, I had held the #1 ranking for years, and I wasn't about to give it up now, summaries be darned. It was the last week of school, and I had taken less tests than nearly every other student in my class. I still had at least 200 points because the tests I had taken were for high-value books, but I was nowhere near #1. However, I had a secret weapon. Harry Potter. Each book was worth an absurd amount of points, and I had just finished the series. So I begrudgingly wrote a few sentence summaries of each book and turned them into Mrs. K. I could see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to figure out what weird game I was playing as I turned in summary after summary. I also did the Percy Jackson series for good measure. I was being driven purely by spite, and I made a perfect score on each test, which netted me around a cool 200 points. This drove me back up to number 1, and oh how Mrs. K seethed. She pretended she was so proud of me for getting number 1, but I could feel her annoyance every time she looked at me. I had taken nearly the least amount of tests and wrote the least summaries in my class, but had somehow managed to have the most points in my grade. I went to our last AR dance and did a victorious cha-cha slide, as well as buying all my classmates candy with my points. In the end, I did have to write a few summaries, but I felt like I had robbed Mrs. K of the satisfaction of seeing her system work. I felt like I had won. I think having to write the summary is a bit over the top. First off, how does she even verify that the summary is right? You could write any paragraph just making up the story, and unless the teacher had read it themselves, wouldn't they just most likely take it as fact? That being said, if they take a test and they fail, that's on the student. If they take a test and they pass, that's also on the student. If they end up failing all of the books in the system and they can't take any more tests, that's their shortcoming, that's their mistake. I don't think making them write a summary is the way to go. And our final story of the day is by Deaf Witch. Stay here? You got it. So back when I was in elementary school, I used to be quite a troublemaker. Principal's office, calls home, etc. Mostly for roughhousing with my friends, nothing serious or bad. So there I was, around 3rd or 4th grade on the playground with my friend. For reference, my elementary school playground comprised of a hardtop, jungle gym, and a field. Surrounding the playground was maybe 20 feet of trees and then fences. Beyond that was either houses, railroad tracks, or woods. So the rule was no going into trees for our safety. Even on the inside of the fences, going beyond the fences was a cardinal crime. Yet on that day, my friend and I went into the trees, probably to be cool or whatever. And subsequently, we got caught by a lunch lady. They supervised our recess, don't know why. As punishment, she told us to stand on the blacktop and not move until she told us to. Done. So recess came and went, and then the lunch ladies formed lines and everyone went inside. Except she forgot to tell us when we could move. And so we stayed there, standing on the hardtop like she told us to. The playground was empty for 10 minutes, then the next round of kids came out. Maybe 10 or so minutes later, the original lunch lady noticed we were there. "What are we still doing outside?" "Miss, we're just standing here until you can say we can move, like you told us." She shooed us in right after that. Neither her or my teacher ever punished me for complying. To be fair, the lunch lady literally said, "Do not move until I tell you to." And as kids in an elementary school, you can't really come down too hard on them for taking something like that so literally. You know, they're just small children, they don't know. But besides that, if you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe and turn notifications on if you haven't. All of those things help the channel out so incredibly much. So no matter what you did, whether it was commenting, liking, subscribing, thank you all so very much for supporting me right here on the Storytime channel. That said, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you all next time right here.